Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. It's an opportunity for me to ramble about whiskey or something for a few minutes. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of these podcasts on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. This afternoon, I have Jim from Liberty Pole Spirits joining me. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. All right, this afternoon, I have Jim from Liberty Pole Spirits joining me. All due credit. The folks from American Mash and Grain, Devon and Chase, told me, months ago, they were like, "Hey, you need to be paying attention to what Liberty Pole is doing in the whiskey world." And so I put it on my list of things to achieve and reached out to Jim. Jim said, "Absolutely, I'll hop on." And that's what I really like about this industry. So if you would, Jim, just kind of give us the elevator speech on what Liberty Pole is and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And first of all, thanks to Devin and Chase. We really like those guys. We like what they're doing. They did what I thought was one of the best long form pieces on Liberty Pole that has been done. So kudos to them, and look forward to meeting them when I go to Denver in a month. Yeah, Liberty Pole. We're about an 8-year-old family-owned craft whiskey distillery in the suburbs of Southwest Pennsylvania, about 40 minutes south of Pittsburgh. We're a proud whiskey-only distillery. We honor the heritage, the history of the whiskey rebellion and those rebellious farmers of the 18th century that took it upon themselves to protest Alexander Hamilton's tax on distilled spirits. And we take a lot of pride in being from Pennsylvania. We take a lot of pride in just the really rich whiskey heritage that we have here. And when we were putting our business plan together, it was a no-brainer to focus on whiskey. And to this day, that's pretty much all we do.
And you touched on something. And I think maybe the whiskey rebellion is this sort of almost, it has become almost a footnote in American history, but it's a pretty significant thing. And maybe that's the next musical that Lin-Manuel needs to write, is the whiskey rebellion musical, so we can see the other side of Hamilton at this point. It might be a little fun there, but you guys are largely family owned or largely family operated, right?
Correct.
So you've slowly integrated your family into this particular hobby turned job, I think maybe is the right way to frame that.
Yeah, no, that's 100% right. I was a, a hobby distiller. The statute of limitations is over on my owning and operating a still, but I had just a nice little 15-gallon backyard copper still that I operated for about 10 years. It was a bonding experience with my two sons. At that point they were middle-aged, but they were science kids, and they really enjoyed the science and technology of fermentation and distillation. So they were caught up in it. And they went off to college and they finished up their engineering degrees and started their own careers. And at the time I was like winding down on my career, and I probably had 7 to 8 years before I could comfortably retire. And I just, at that point, really didn't enjoy going to work on a daily basis, wasn't enjoying what I was doing. um, Kind of saw the rise of craft distilling. At that point had become a pretty adept, a decent whiskey maker, and talked my wife into, hey, this would be a good career 2.0 for us. And I could work out a bit of a runway, to exit my career and still maintain a bit of healthcare coverage, and we could start this distillery as a part-time operation. And shortly after we did that, we realized we took off too big of a bite, and we were looking to hire somebody. And that's when my sons said, "Yeah, you know what? You're not going to hire anybody. We want to come and work there." So they left their engineering careers about 2 months into the start of the distillery, and 8 years later, we're still at it, and things are going well.
So I guess you had an entire career before you came to this, and it had absolutely nothing to do with whiskey in a direct line. What what got distilling into your brain, even as a hobbyist? My dad homebrewed beer for a long time, but he never was like, you know what, I'm going to start up a microbrewery.
Yeah, not naivete is kind of the best answer that I can give on why why we decided to take it to a business. But more importantly, and I think your question was why distilling. And it was really, again, back to my family. My sons wanted to get me a home brewing kit for a Father's Day gift, and my wife suggested that your dad really doesn't drink much beer, but he's really developing a taste for whiskey. Why don't we see if we can find him a hobby still? And that's kind of what started the passion. And once you get into it, and once you start experimenting and getting better, and it just becomes it's a rabbit hole.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to hear that, like mom saves the day, right? And doesn't end up you don't end up with
Oh,
a beer kit for beer that you don't really want to make, which I guess you technically have like, a distilling kit is maybe a third of a beer kit and then two-thirds of other stuff. Um, what It's easy to know, at least in Kentucky, where people's whiskey journey starts. Almost always it's going to be Maker's Mark or something like that. But for you, like, what was the gateway into getting into whiskey? Was it American whiskey? Was it Scotch? Was it Japanese? Was it something else?
yeah, it was Irish whiskey. I was, I've got some Irish heritage, and grew up with Jameson in the house, and you just started really developing a taste for Irish whiskeys. Not only Jameson, but the Spots and Teeling, and there's just a ton of wonderful Irish whiskeys, and that was really the start of my whiskey journey.
And so you guys, I think I've read this correctly. You've historically operated off of a pot still. Is that trying to stay in that vein of honoring the heritage of Irish whiskey, or even just whiskey in general, because a lot of it was pot still, or is that you prefer the flavor, or what's the ethos there?
So, I think any craft distiller at startup, is kind of forced into a pot still, just because of the cost and the availability of pot distillation. But in our case, we really love the flavor of pot distilled whiskey. We think pot distilled whiskey is a superior whiskey. Um, we just underwent an expansion, and at this level of expansion that we did, a lot of craft distillers might consider bringing in a column just for the efficiency gains. But we refused to do that. We had our equipment vendors trying to talk us into it, but we're just focused on pot, and that's what we will always be.
And I think at least for pot still whiskey, it feels like that whiskey becomes a place where science and art merge together, and it really depends on what your distillation method is where that art happens, right? And so for people who are
Oh,
using
yeah.
pot, it does begin at the pot, whereas with a column distillation, maybe the artistry begins in the aging and in the blending and all of the things that sort of happen afterwards, because you're really just trying to get the most alcohol you can out, that still retains some sort of flavor. And so it makes sense on a scale of kind of wanting to explore some degree of artistry. But you mentioned you guys have a new distillery in a new location. Um, I, there's a really really great video on YouTube, and I'll probably put the link here of a drone fly through of everything. So tell me about your expansion and what that's like, going from non-existent 8 years ago to building what I think you've deemed the largest rick house in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yes, and to qualify that, John, it's actually the only rick house
Oh
in the
yeah.
state of Pennsylvania. So it makes it the largest. It's 3,600 barrel capacity. We had the guys from Busick Construction in Bardstown come up and construct that for us, and they were they were both, admiring what we were doing, but kind of laughing at the size of it, given that, their typical rick house is 30, 40,000 barrels. They told us that this was the smallest 5 floor rick house that they've ever done. They've built some smaller ones with fewer barrel capacity, but not a 5 floor rick house. So this is the smallest capacity 5 story rick house they've ever built. Um, and that was fun. But yeah, I mean, you know, to undertake this expansion, it was, it was definitely a lot of angst filled months to plan and to think about, making this move. But we're kind of in a situation that, we only make whiskey. So, if we ever want to expand our distribution beyond Pennsylvania, and right now we're only available in Western Pennsylvania, it's a long journey. You got to make a lot of whiskey. You got to store it, age it for a lot of years. And, we would have never been able to accomplish that in our old location. We didn't have the distillation capacity. We didn't have the storage ability. So, it just became a question of, are we happy kind of being a very small local craft, or did we want to, not necessarily, play with the big boys, but just get to a point where, we could distribute to the eastern side of Pennsylvania, and maybe we could get into Ohio and New York. And, we're not looking to be a national player, but we did have some larger goals that we couldn't accomplish in a smaller place.
So what is your, I guess, you've got a 3,600 barrel capacity. What is your distilling capacity? Like, do you have a projection on how long before you're going to be filled up in your rick house?
Yeah, so we have about 900 barrels in the rick house now, and that is a combination of the barrels that we filled in our old location plus what we've done since we've opened in July. Our capacity, or our production capacity, is about 700 barrels a year. So, so we still have several years of, growth in that existing rick house before we have any issues about, filling it up.
Yeah, and I mean, it obviously looks that way, and having that much storage enables you to do probably a lot more um, experiments, and just a little peace of mind that you have the ability to grow. You mentioned you're only available in Western Pennsylvania. Is there any online retailers that have allocations of this that they can sell out of?
No, no, we haven't approached any online retailers yet. We're just kind of trying to walk that fine line of, being able to bottle and sell enough whiskey locally to keep the lights on, while continuing to let our barrels, age. We just looked at some numbers the other day. We're Right now, we have been bottling about 38% of our available mature whiskey. And when I say mature whiskey, we're taking 3 to 4 year old barrels at this point. And
Mhm.
so of those 3 to 4 year old barrels that we have, we're only using about 38% of them right now, to sell in our distillery and in the Pennsylvania fine wine and good spirits store system. Pennsylvania is a control state. The state
Mhm.
controls all spirit sales. So between those two main outlets, that's what we're doing. If we went with an online distributor, we would just be worried we'd have to dip further into those barrels, and we're really trying to get to that minimum 4 year old 53 gallon barrel whiskey, and hope to do that in the next year or so.
Mhm. Do you have a sort of like a ceiling of age that you're going after, or you don't know yet?
We don't know yet. I put a lot of stock into what the Kentucky master distillers like Jimmy Russell, Freddie No, say that 7 to 8 years is kind of I think, a sweet spot for American whiskey in a new charred barrel. So, we'd like to let some barrels get to that age and kind of see where they go.
Yeah, and that's I mean, for the last few years, you've been talking about owning your backyard and having the expansion capability, just makes that yard a little bit bigger, right? Like, you're not
Right.
looking for nationwide approach, but you are looking to increase the footprint because, I mean, no, ultimately, you want more people to taste the art that you're making. As I was kind of poking through, you've got a new distillery. Um, do you have a new still, or did you almost have a new still?
Both. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we do have a new still. So when we moved from our original location, we were operating a 600-gallon system. We had three 600-gallon fermenters, a 600-gallon cooker, and a 600-gallon pot still from Specific Mechanical there in Victoria, British Columbia. So when we moved, we sold all of the 600-gallon tanks, with the exception of the still, the 600-gallon still. We now use that as our spirit still. That is our finishing still. We upgraded our brew deck to 1,000-gallon system, so we have 4,000-gallon fermenters, 1,000-gallon cooker, and we got 1,000-gallon pot still from Vendome. And your use of the term almost is really fitting, because that's still smacked off a an overpass on its way to Pittsburgh from Louisville, on the Brent Spence Bridge around Cincinnati. The trucking company put it on a flatbed. Um, Still don't have the details on why they didn't check out the height and the route, but it smacked off a bridge at about 45 miles an hour, sustained a lot of damage, put us another month or so behind schedule. But Vendome, they took care of it. They fixed it.
Mm.
It looks as good as new. They got us down there to witness the factory certification tests on after the repairs had been done. So those guys have a reputation, and it's well deserved for their quality. They do great work.
Yeah, I'm sure there are probably cheaper ways to go on trying to purchase a still, but at the end of the day, you're buying quality, and especially if you're wanting to kind of put your name on the line for a particular product. Um, you know, uh, when you began the process of building a distillery, did you imagine it would grow to this level, or did you have, is there a further goal that you had at the beginning, or is it just like we'll see what happens?
No, I mean, literally the original business plans were, a mom and pop distillery for my wife and I's kind of retirement activity. Plans change when our sons joined the business, right? They're both married with young families, and the trajectory has to change. You have to grow the business to support that sort of family life. And that's when we really first, with an expansion at our original location, we started with a 300-gallon system, upsized that to a 600-gallon system in 2019, and then almost immediately realized we needed even bigger. So we started planning this current move.
So you begin distilling right now. You guys have you have corn whiskey, you have bourbon, you have rye. um did you set out trying to make a bourbon, trying to make a corn whiskey, trying to make a rye? Like, how do you come to the different spirits that you've decided to distill? And I guess that's the question. How do you decide, this is
Yeah,
the one we're going to go after?
yeah. Honestly, those all those whiskeys that you mentioned, and you didn't mention the peated bourbon. They were all, mash bills that I had been running on my 15-gallon hobby still. We, I always felt like, even though we're in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is a traditionally rye centric state, I always felt that we really, if we were going to do whiskey, we should have a diversified whiskey portfolio. So, I always wanted to do a bourbon. I love a good corn whiskey. Not enough distilleries make corn whiskey. But even with the plan to do these diversified whiskeys, we still wanted to be a little bit different. And we didn't set out to make Kentucky bourbon, right? We're using a pot still. B, we're using Bloody Butcher corn, which is a non-GMO heirloom varietal that just has a just an incredible flavor profile, and we love it. So while we do want to have a kind of a across the board whiskey portfolio, we still want to be unique and a little bit different from the heritage brands.
So you touched on that. You guys do feature Bloody Butcher corn. Was it explicitly flavor profile, or were there other considerations of why you guys chased down Bloody Butcher as your corn source?
It was mainly flavor profile. At the time it was also incredibly unique. We didn't know of anybody else that was using it at the time. Since then, others have come out with Bloody Butcher whiskeys. We actually found a pretty legendary Western Pennsylvania moonshiner, and had a meeting with him, and just talking about different grains and different types of whiskey, and he was adamant that we needed to find a farmer to grow Bloody Butcher corn for us, because he said, you will just love you'll love the flavor profile, and he was right. We absolutely do.
So it's a good question there. Did you have to find a farmer, or was there an abundance of Bloody Butcher in the area that allowed for you to be able to purchase it?
No, we had to find a farmer. We had to find a farmer. We found a young family, a young guy who was farming his family's land, and we reached out to him, and he said that he had no experience growing a non-GMO heirloom crop. He didn't know if he could do it, and I guess he was sitting around the family dinner table one night, and it's really a heartwarming story. But I guess the guy's grandfather, who hadn't farmed in years, his eyes lit up, and he said, "Jeremy, I can help you. I can show you how to plant and grow this grain." And yeah, it was really neat. So this guy planted our first crop of Bloody Butcher corn on, I think, 9 acres, and great story.
Are you? I guess given your capacity to distill, is there a risk that you're going to outgrow his capacity to supply corn?
Yeah, we already have. Um,
Okay.
so, 2 growing seasons ago, we had to talk with Jeremy, and at that point, he had kind of transitioned into more of a gentleman farmer. He had a full-time job, and he wasn't sure that he could accommodate us. We weren't sure that he could accommodate us. We viewed it as a pretty big risk, so we reached out to our good friend Herman Mahalich of Dad's Hat whiskey. Herman is a
Mhm.
native Western Pennsylvania, even though Dad's Hat is in Bucks County. But Herman made an introduction to his farmer for us, and we now use Nevada to grow our both our Bloody Butcher corn and our rye.
Mhm. So if you've got a myriad of things that you distill, do you have one that is like you prefer to distill it, or you always kind of when you're hobby distilling, did you like one better than the other?
I liked bourbon. Rye's tough to work with. That said, if you kind of put me in a corner and told me we could only distill one whiskey, I would have to fall back to my, Pennsylvania pride, and we would choose to be a rye distillery,
Mhm.
based on where we're at, and I think we make a fabulous rye, and I think rye from Pennsylvania just gets a little bit more traction than bourbon from Pennsylvania, even though I think we make a great bourbon too, but rye just has that appeal.
it has that regionality in the history that's
Yes.
connected to it. And I mean, I've talked about this way back in the beginning of my podcast, but if we really look at it, like rye is the first whiskey of the United States, right? We're all like, this is bourbon country, but at the end of the day, back when Kentucky was still Virginia, we were making a lot of rye then too, right? Because that was the
Yep.
primary grain. But your current rye that you have is, and this is a quotation from the website, it's crafted in the style of a traditional Monongahela rye whiskey. What does that mean?
So, your guess is as good as mine, is as good as any of the historians. There was not any kind of handwritten definition of Monongahela rye. It is generally considered to be rye whiskey that was made in the Monongahela Valley, which is pretty much Western Pennsylvania. Um, and it was made from a mash bill of predominantly rye. Some people would also say that predominantly rye with no corn. We're kind of the opinion that, if you were a farmer in the 1700s and you owned a still and you had extra corn, you were going to distill that. You weren't going to keep that out of your whiskey to make a true Monongahela rye. So, today's interpretation of Monongahela rye generally is high rye, maybe no corn, pot distilled.
Mhm.
That's I think that covers pretty much the current definition.
So what is it, are you 100% rye?
No, we're not. We have a mash bill of 74% rye. And actually that's broken down into 61% rye and 13% malted rye. So that's a total of 74% rye. We have 13% wheat and 13% malt. So
Do you have a preferred rye that you use, or is it just whatever rye is available?
whatever rye is available. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. That said, we do have a couple of distillations under our belt using rosin rye.
Mhm.
We just did a week's worth of rosin rye last month. We have a barrel of rosin rye that will turn 4 years old this year. So we're really excited about potentially having the first bottled and bond or 4-year-old rosin rye since Prohibition. But yeah, the rye is whatever variety the farmer happened to plant that year.
So the rosin rye that you have, where did you source those grains from?
That comes from Dancing Star Farms. Bob McDonald, part of the Lara Fields project, Delaware Valley Fields, to kind of resuscitate that grain from a seed bank. So all of our rose and rye distillations have come from Bob McDonald and Dancing Star
Mhm.
Farms.
Yeah, I asked that. I asked that, and I already knew the answer to it. I've listened to Distillers Talk. I've listened to a bunch of different episodes you've been on, and I've talked about that specific rye varietal before with Ari Sussman in Michigan
Right,
and what he's
right.
got going on with his crazy experiment. And so you're, I guess, have you tasted the 4 year recently? Like, is there like optimism that this is the year? Or
Yes, it's fabulous. We have regularly kind of been bottling 3.5, 4-year-old rye, and Lou Bryson always talks about a famous brewer, distiller. I wish I could remember the guy's name, but the quote that he says is, "The world will soon discover the beauty of young rye whiskey." And I think this Rosen rye that we have, we could have proudly bottled that already. It's delicious, but we're so close to hitting kind of a statement age for us that
Mhm.
we're fingers crossed that it doesn't turn. I don't think it will. I think it's just going to keep getting better.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's one of the things that all the whiskey nerds are like, we're all anxiously awaiting, like who's going to get there first. How am I, what am I going to have to do to get a bottle, right? Am I have to send somebody on an airplane? Like what's going to happen here? Because it's it's the nerdy stuff, I think. But I will say, you guys were gracious enough to share quite a few samples with me, and this barrel proof rye, the single barrel proof rye, is one of the
Yeah.
best ryes that I've had in a year. And I was working on my 2023, best of tastes, and I didn't get to try this one until the beginning of the year, so it doesn't make it into the 2023. But I can damn assure you that it will be on the 24 for sure, because it
Thank
is
you.
phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think
Um,
I really love the way that Laura kind of organized this rosin distribution. She got it to different distillers who have different styles and different mash bills. I know,
mhm.
Stolen Wolf was, the first to release a rosin rye. They run a column still. They have a different mash bill. So I'm really looking forward to when these are more readily available from kind of the cross section of distillers that are working with the grain, just to see the differences and the nuances from
Mhm.
different distillation styles and different mash bills.
Yeah, it's going to end up being like baseball cards where you got to collect them all, right? So if
Right,
you're a rye aficionado, you've got to have one of everything you can possibly get your hands on. Um,
right.
One of the other things that you guys have worked on is peating, right? You've had a peated rye, you have a peated bourbon as your standard offering. You have had a peated rye as a special offering. Um, Introducing a peated rye or peated bourbon or peated rye or peat in general into American whiskey. What was your hope there?
Again, having something that you can't get from Jim Beam or Maker's Mark, a unique whiskey that we just had really noticed. And this actually, the story of our peated bourbon goes back to my hobby distilling days when I was making bourbon and rye and corn whiskey. But my wife is she's a bogger. She loves Isla scotches. The smokier, the dirtier, the better. So she came to me one day and said, "Why don't you make me a peated single malt?" And if you've ever home brewed, you know that peated malt is not really an ingredient that you can find in homebrew stores, um, which is where home distillers get their grains from. So I went to my homebrew store and I saw that they did have peated malt, but it was in like quarter pound bags, and just the cost was more than I wanted to spend to make a 15-gallon mash. So I thought, well, how about if I just add, a little bit of peated malt to a bourbon mash, and it was actually really delicious. And that was the kind of the genesis of our peated bourbon. And when we put our business plan together, we just felt like, okay, our goal is to bring some unique whiskeys to market. And very very few, if any, distillers had a peated bourbon at the time. And it's so funny, John. It is the best whiskey people have ever had, or the worst whiskey people have ever had, depending on the palate of the person that's trying it. And we have thick skin in the distilling business, and I know when I give that to people to taste, I know that not everybody's going to like it, but some people are going to love it, and that's what we're trying to do with that.
And I think that peating and smoke in general is I love that distilleries are starting to explore that. Mainly because I would challenge that a lot of the people that that are bourbon or rye drinkers that are traditional, and they taste peat and they're like, "Oh, I hate this." If you bring them a really really nice smoked pulled pork sandwich, they'll go nuts for it. But the problem is that there's a lot of similar flavor profiles, at least in light peating. They just look at whiskey and they expect it to be sweet and sticky and syrup, and whenever you start adding in salinity and heaviness and more unctuous flavors, it throws them way off. And if they come in without the preconceived notion that they hate peat, a lot of your barbecue lovers end up also liking peated whiskeys in general. And I like that everybody's not everybody. There is a small quantity of people. It's definitely not an everybody. There's a lot of people that are not doing it. That it's an exploration. But your wife was the peat person, and I'm guessing you weren't. And so you know was there some, area in between what she liked peat and that you didn't like peat, and that's where you wanted to land? Or, as you kinda continue this process, are you gonna increase your peat, or you just sort of stuck with, "This is the flavor we're gonna use"?
So we really like the mash bill that we're using, both for the peated bourbon and the peated rye. What we are finding, and I think this is true for, for single malts, is that the older the whiskey gets, the more the peat kind of fades into the background. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's a challenge that I think we're going to have to, figure out as our whiskeys get to that 4, 5, 6 year old um, age. Is maybe we don't want to let the peated bourbon sit as long, because it only has about a 30% of peated malt in the mash bill, so there's not a lot there to begin with. And as that starts to fade when it gets older, we may want to pull those barrels a little bit earlier. Maybe store them on the bottom floor of the rick house as opposed to the fifth floor. So those are all things that we kind of have in our notebook to watch as these barrels mature.
Yeah, and it definitely is, the peated bourbon is definitely a great entry point for a person who's not, because I am not a person who's super super comfortable with smoke. I'm trying to ease myself into it because very much Western Kentucky kid, grew up on, bourbon and, Kentucky rye,
Sure.
which is sort of still just bourbon. Um, but the 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 peating on this is not so much that if you find a person who doesn't like peat that it throws them way off, but you are right that it is a little bit light. If I put this in, a stack with some other ones, I had an opportunity to put this alongside of, a whiskey which is, Alan Bishop was
Right.
doing out of, French Lick, and, I got to the point where I felt like I was just tasting, another bourbon at this point, because there's a very the whiskey witch had more, smoky, acrid flavors than that, and so it almost got dwarfed
Right.
in it. But, um, all that to say, it is a great entry point for, I think, for people who are unfamiliar with peat, because walking in and trying to buy a peated Scotch, if you've never had a Scotch before or a peat, is super scary. But it's a great place to be. But, uh, one of the things that I've learned recently is, we have peat in the United States. Have you considered trying to work with someone in Pennsylvania to pick up some Pennsylvania peat and do some malting, or is that a thing that is just too far to try to have happen?
We've discussed that kind of just at a very conceptual ideas phase, but I would love to kind of explore that. I really would. At this point though, I I I've only heard of peat bogs in the Pacific Northwest. I know that Alan has uncovered some in Indiana. I don't know of any in Pennsylvania, but yeah, it's definitely something we would like to consider.
Well, and what I've come across, because after I heard that, and I heard that specifically from Alan the first time, he was like, "Yeah, there's peat in the United States." I start googling like where is there peat, and a lot of the time the peat ends up being in, national or state parks, right? Because there are a lot of wetland areas or whatever, and so
Right.
having access to it is pretty limited. And I think that is
Right.
the case with Pennsylvania. I think there's some, but it's in, like, government owned wetlands. But
Okay.
maybe a little bit of a hard shift, but you've mentioned this before, sort of mentioned it. Have you guys considered? Are you exploring the idea of doing a single malt with the rise of American single malt in the United States?
Yeah, we actually have a couple batches in barrels right now. Those were collaborative projects with local breweries.
Hmm.
We do not have we don't have a false bottom tank. We don't have a sparging operation. So the problem with American single malt, and we do, like most American distillers, we do everything on grain, but
Hmm.
malt is tough because the husks are very tannic and bitter, and if you leave the grain in your mash during fermentation and distillation, and we did that. We did a single malt early on, where we didn't quite understand that concept yet, and and I will tell you that single malt is our oldest barrel in the rick house now. It's coming up on 7 years old. Um, and the only reason it's still in barrels is because it's just not, you know, it's not ready for public consumption.
Hmm.
So that was a lesson that we learned, and we're just kind of watching that. But in the interim, then we reached out to a couple local brewers and had them brew some nice non-hopped beers for us, and we've got a few of those that are approaching 4 years old now. Delicious. We have some ideas on how to make our own single malts using. We have a centrifuge that we use to separate the grain from our stripping run. We're thinking that maybe we could use that centrifuge to separate the grain after the mashing before it goes into the fermenter. So that's a project for 2024. If we can pull that off, we're definitely gonna incorporate more single malts into the portfolio.
Okay. So there's this will be maybe a little bit of a hard shift, but early on, and you continue to, you guys had a pretty good focus on cocktails, and I think I've heard either you or your wife say, it was a great way to feature younger whiskeys, at
Yes.
least within your current operation. Um, what cocktail would be the best feature for your bourbon?
An old fashioned.
Hmm.
Uh, it, we do, and to kind of backtrack just a couple, a couple feet on that. Yeah, I tell a lot of other people that are interested in distilleries to really focus on, a cocktail program, because that bought us. I don't want to say time, but it helped us gain ambassadors and gain fans, and kind
Hmm.
of um, we were always proud of our whiskey, but whiskey out of a 5-gallon barrel. I don't know that I would use that same business model if I were starting again, but having a really amazing cocktail program that my wife put together, that really helped. It really helped smooth over that period, and we just gained so many fans, and turned so many people into whiskey lovers, that it's definitely something that I recommend to all other distillers. If your state allows you to have a cocktail program, it is definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, and
Yeah, you asked specifically for bourbon. I said old fashioned. I'm going to backtrack on that one too, because that's really a rye. We make really great rye old fashions. Um, a bourbon cocktail. I love a Boulevardier. That's kind of my go-to cocktail when I go out. I think our bourbon really hits all the right notes with the Campari and the vermouth.
yeah, so you already touched it then, because I was going to say the exact same thing for rye. Right, like that was going to be the next question: is what's going to go in
Yeah,
that. And then
yeah.
peated bourbon, right? Is it still a Boulevardier for peated bourbon, or is it a different cocktail for that?
No, I'll tell you, the peated bourbon. We make a penicillin.
Hmm.
We change cocktails every month, and one of the months we always have a penicillin cocktail. That Penicillin is a traditional Scotch cocktail that it's a little bit of lemon and ginger and Scotch, and then it has an Isla float on the top to give it a little bit of a smokiness. But we just use our peated bourbon as the entire whiskey content of that drink, and it's the way it plays with the ginger and the lemon. It's fantastic. The peated bourbon is the surprise cocktail whiskey, because when we started, I really envisioned that as much more of just a neat, or an ice sipping whiskey, but it's the whiskey base of some of our most popular cocktails. It really is a nice whiskey for a cocktail.
And I'll say this: I spent a little bit of time kind of poking through some of the YouTube videos that you guys had generated during the pandemic around cocktail creation and the Dalgona that your wife made on YouTube. I
Huh.
think that was your
Yeah.
wife that you made on
Yes.
YouTube has me really questioning this idea that me and a fellow group of whiskey geeks decided we were going to do at the beginning of January. We were doing like this 5 month long weight loss challenge, and that Dalgona almost broke me. It almost broke me. I
Oh,
was like, this looks fantastic. And so I'm going to save it for a cheat meal. But it's refreshing to see a brand lean into that because that is the way that you get people into whiskey that aren't into whiskey is usually through cocktails, trying to, say, hey, here, drink this 110 proof rye whiskey that is probably going to blow you out is not the right way, but it's also a much larger market. People that want to drink cocktails, people that like whiskey also like cocktails, but people that like cocktails don't always like whiskey. And so
right.
kind of exploring that is a great thing. And it's a thing that you guys do in on site because you do have the cocktail program on site. You appear to have, from that drone footage, you appear to have a really, really great experience. What time of the year should, the average consumer, myself included, come to visit Liberty Pole?
Every season has advantages. It, we have beautiful stonework and functioning fireplaces, and we had this amazing snowfall on Saturday here, and it was so nice to sit in front of the wingback chairs with the fire going and sipping on a Manhattan while it was snowing outside. Love that. Um, Summertime, we have a really nice outdoor patio drinking space. Again, with an outdoor fireplace. We have, if you're a cigar smoker, we have a separate cigar smoking area outside too. So summers, really nice if you're more of an outdoors person.
Yeah, and I'll say, this is maybe a statement for the fellow Southerners that happen to listen or watch this. Snow scares us, right? Because we don't know how to drive on snow and ice. When you only get 3 or 4 days a year to practice, you never really get good at it, and your state/city is never prepared to handle it. But traveling to a place like Pennsylvania, largely, I mean, there's a system that's been in place for a long time. It kind of makes things a little bit better. Um,
Right.
you also do some special releases, and those are in usually in the distillery as well. You've had spiced whiskey, you've got single barrels, a high rye bourbon, a peated rye. Are there any other upcoming special releases that you can talk about that might be coming in 24 that somebody might want to plan their visit around as well?
Yeah, that's part of what we really tried to hold on to, even with it logistically, it becomes a little harder to experiment when have a bigger system and you need more grain, and it's tough, but we still try to dedicate 15% of our yearly mashes to experimental whiskeys. And right now, actually, I thought that question might come up, so I'm prepared for it. We have aging in our rick house right now. We have the high rye bourbon, and you made a
Mhm.
comment just a few minutes ago about the Kentucky rye being basically a bourbon, and so that always offended us, right? We hated that 51% rye whiskey, so we turned the tables and made a 51% corn bourbon with a 40% rye content. Called that a Pennsylvania bourbon. Um,
Mhm.
we do a mesquite rye every year. Didn't have one this year because it wasn't ready. Didn't taste like it was ready. So we kept that for another year. But that's we get some mesquite smoked malt. Um, we do our peated rye every year. That one, Fred Minnick put that at number 50 in his top 100 whiskeys recently. Uh, the All Things Whiskey podcast, based out of Denver, Mike Outcalt, named our peated rye his whiskey of the year this year in 2023. So that was pretty cool. We just released a peated rye in an Oloroso sherry barrel. We just released a peated bourbon out of a Curacao barrel. We've got a 4 grain bourbon. We have a Hickory King white corn bourbon. We have a chocolate malted rye. I mentioned we have a couple single malts. We've done a couple batches of a MGP style 95.5 rye. We've even played with a couple sour mash weeks. We sour mash some rye and we sour mash some bourbon. And in terms of finishing, we got some really great funky rum barrels from Martinique, and we're doing some rum finished ryes as well as some toasted barrel finished ryes, double oaked.
Yeah, so you touched
I don't
on
know
all
whether
of the
they're all
finishes.
gonna. I don't
Well,
know if they'll all be out in 2024, but a good number of them will make an appearance this
mhm.
year.
Yeah, you touched on all the finishes that I knew about, and then a whole bunch more that you guys have working on. Finished whiskey seems to be an area for growth for a lot of folks in 2024. And with you also have single barrels. With single barrels named like Tarragon, Pineapple, Greedy Ghost,
Right.
Sweet Peat, Holiday Embers. These all sound fantastic, and it makes me super happy that any person can fly with up to 5 liters of whiskey and check baggage, right? And so, regardless of where you live, there's an opportunity to carry these things back. But if I were to come to the distillery, what should I expect from the experience on site or in the area? I know you've talked about sort of the way everything is, but as far as other food, places to stay, whiskey, because I saw that you guys have partners on your website, for lodging and whatnot. And then I think finally there may be a festival that happens during the summertime.
So our new location is kind of in the the heartbeat of Washington County. We are on a wide, we're just minutes off of Interstate 79, which is the main north-south interstate, and Interstate 70, which you could take Interstate 70 all the way out to Denver, Colorado, and beyond. So two major interstates. We're literally minutes off of either one of them. We're right next to a pretty popular casino. And anytime there's a casino in play, there's lots of hotel beds, and so we have some deals that people can mention Liberty Pole at a couple of the local hotels, and get some deals on rooms. As far as our experience, and we lean heavily into that experiential nature of distilleries. We try to really give people, besides making good whiskey, I think you need to do more than that these days. So we've built we call it the meeting house, but it is our 18th century themed tasting room, cocktail bar. We serve small bites there. We have a tasting room, a bottle shop that we do complimentary tastings of all of our spirits. We do tours 4 days a week. You can take a tour that goes through the production floor, goes into the rick house, ends with a seated flight tasting. We're just putting the finishing touches on a barrel thieving experience tour. We're going to call it the immersive rick house tasting, where you'll be able to go in and we'll thief 3 different barrels for tastings and allow people to fill a bottle with whatever barrel kind of they like the most. So lots of things we're trying to, we know we're not on the Bourbon Trail. We're not in Kentucky, but if you live in in from Erie to Philadelphia to we're a much shorter drive than driving to Louisville. So so we're trying to give
Yeah.
people that full immersive soup to nuts experience without making that long drive to Kentucky.
Well, it definitely feels like you're positioned to have a fantastic on-site experience, and from the images and the videos that I've seen, it looks fantastic, and it's a great opportunity to knock another state off. And I like going to Louisville and Lexington as much as the next person, but at the end of the day, we're still pivoting around Kentucky whiskey, right, which is going to be primarily bourbon, and even when you're doing bourbon in Pennsylvania, you're still aging in a different location with a different type of climate. and you're using a pot still, which is going to be, and there's this term craft that's often kind of used as an insult, and I don't think it is. It's just a different flavor profile that comes off of column versus pot, and vodka's made off column, so you could say a lot of things about it, but at the end of the day, it's fantastic to have other variations of whiskey to be able to try. And so, I've already sort of looked at, what does that trip look like for me and my family in the next, couple years, because it's a fantastic area with a lot of rich history as it is. And then I can tag in a little bit of a whiskey excursion. It's super fantastic. And I appreciate the time that you've given me today. If you've got anything else that you want to cover, you guys have a website, you have a Facebook, you have an Instagram. I think you even have a Twitter, maybe, or X or whatever it's called these days.
We
I'm not
do.
really
Yeah.
sure. I'm
Yeah.
old enough to say that now, I guess. Is there anything else you wanted to share with folks before we call it a day?
As I mentioned in our little pre-talk, I had full confidence that you were going to cover everything that we wanted to talk about, and you did. So I've got nothing. You really did a good job, John.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I'm going to hit pause on this. And like I said, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to this offering from the Embellish Pod. If you have enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media at TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod. Give me a follow and you can keep up with what's going on here. I can also be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, and contact details. Thanks for hanging out today.